Yeah, I'm good.
Three, two, one. Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adbukta.
This is Merps. Hello once again. Hope you guys are having a very successful time in the arena. We got some stuff to talk about. Some news came out, and the leaderboards are out, which means I am no longer number one.
Oof.
My time is over. My reign is done. It's back to mediocre Merps. That's it. I'm
Well,
finished.
you had a good run. The leaderboard didn't come out until late this month,
I know.
so so it was a pretty good run. And your reign is not totally over. Your number one reign for the previous month is over, but as it turns out, no one beat your 9.2324 or whatever record as the number one in NA of all time.
It was actually 2-7.
Okay, actually 2-7, but the actual one that Blizzard counted
I know.
was
Yeah,
like
yeah.
2-3 or whatever. The number one player in for the arena leaderboards in August was, and there was some like controversy about how Blizzard was counting it because Blizzard had done the weird thing randomly where they subtracted one win out of every Frost Festival run. Because remember, this is in August, so the Frost Festival was still going for like the first week and a half. And so Blizzard tried to like do some weird adjustment. People got really mad, so Blizzard went back and undid their adjustments. And now I think it's like finalized and official. And the number one score is a 9.1. So congrats, Merps. You still have your throne for now and for the near future
For now.
because it's going to be hard without the Frost Festival to beat that.
It will be hard, but look, definitely possible. I think I have heard through the grapevine actually that one streamer has a 9.4 this month in September.
That's
I
pretty
know,
impressive.
I know. That is very impressive. And we shall see. We shall see.
Mm-hmm.
So, anyways, congrats to those on the leaderboard from last month, which is August. I would give them a shout out, except I don't know how to say their names because the Meow clan, as you guys know, which is just an arena clan, I guess.
It's a Chinese like group of players who play the arena, and
right.
They did something crazy this last month.
They did. So if you look at the NA leaderboards, the Meow Clan basically chose the name of a popular Hearthstone streamer from China, and the name is basically like this streamer was here. I think that's how you know, sort of a rough translation. And they took the number 1 spot, number 3 spot, number 4 spot, number 6 spot, number 8 spot, number 9 spot, 11, 16, 18, 22, 37, 40. It's ridiculous.
They took a bunch of spots. So normally, if you like follow the leaderboards, the Meow Clan has like Meow this, Meow that, and they take a few spots right in like the top 10. They're always very good. They're very competitive with the West, and they play on you know the NA servers and the EU servers. But this time, and I think so. I was talking with Benage of iing.com, which is a Chinese website that does Hearthstone stuff, and he said that they were trying to line it up so that it went down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and
Wow.
they thought they had succeeded, but then because Blizzard counts stuff in a really weird way, as you know. Like, the end result was kind of like scrambled, so they didn't get to order it all the way they wanted to.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so they wanted it to be like 1 and then 2, so and 3 and 4 and 5, and instead it's 1, 2, 3, 6, 5, 7, and then some of their ones were not in like it wasn't coordinated. So some of these Miao Clan, like Miao Xingren in number 5, it's obviously part of the Miao Clan. Just has no number. And but still, that meant they have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. At least 8 of the top 11 players in A this month were from the Meow Clan.
Right. That's pretty sick.
Mm-hmm.
So also, is number 2 from the?
I don't know. I don't know if Hao Qi, who got number 2, is from the Meow Clan as well or not.
But anyways, also additional congratulations to Celeritas at number 7 with 8.73, and also Hafu, a very well-known name of a return player on the leaderboard, at number 10 with 8.67. But like the big story is just the Meow Clan dominating the NA leaderboards, coming over to our side and just crushing it.
Yeah. Oh, and the Board and Fox. Sorry, I'm just reading my. I think Board and Fox 1 and Board and Fox at number 12 and 13 are also part of the Meow Clan.
You got to be kidding me.
Yeah, no, they're part of the Meow Clan. So we now have something like. There's a lot. Let's just put it that way. So instead of 8 of the top 11, it's actually 9 of the top 13. Sorry, not 9. 8 of the top 13, depending on if Haoti is part of the Meow Clan or if it's just a Chinese name and we're racist.
It's probably that. Just a little bit of that. But yeah, that is what the NA leaderboards look like for this month. So I had no idea that you talked to, I forgot who the person was. Did the Meow Clan just decide to go ham this month?
Yeah, I mean, they're always like playing in NA, and they wanted to see what they could do this month. And so they went for it, mostly during the Frost Festival. Because it was one of those things where they were, if you do it during the Frost Festival and Blizzard kept their policy from July, which is just to count things normally, you have a much better chance at getting on the leaderboard. And I think that's also when Hafu did her runs. It's just like when you did like most of your runs in July. It's a smart thing to do if you want to get on the leaderboard in those 2 months. And so they just went for it. And their message to I asked them if they wanted to say anything. They're like, no, tell people to like come try out the Chinese servers.
Interesting. Very cool. Very cool.
So yeah, huge congrats to the Meow Clan. That is something that no one here has done before. Like no one's been that coordinated and that good to get all these spots for a month.
Right. I mean, you not only have to have a large group of people coordinating and doing it, they have to be really freaking good at the arena to like do this, right? Have 8 out of 11 spots in the top 11. That's insane. Congrats to the Meow Clan out there, if you so happen to be listening to this. And of course, they also came out with the leaderboard in EU as well. Want to give a shout out to the number 1 in EU, which is Zipoi, with 9.8. That is insane. I know, 9.8 average wins, just crushing it. Number 2 was Winterborn at 9.53, and then there's a more gradual decline, right? And it's Lita at 9.47, but Zipoi just obliterating the competition at 9.8. And it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to see someone beat this without the Frost Festival.
Yep.
So big congrats to all of those on the leaderboard for this month. And it's been an interesting 2 months because of the Frost Festival. And it's obviously been an extremely popular event and a great event for 99.9999% of players because free stuff, right? They get free runs, they get free wins. Everything is really good about it. It just threw a wrench in. Yeah,
it's just uncoordinated with the leaderboard.
Right.
So if you're like hardcore enough to like just do it during the Frost Festival time, then you're also fine. But if you were like a little less hardcore and you're like, well, I'm going to do like 30, 40 runs over the course of a month like usual, then you kind of get screwed a little bit for these 2 months. But hey, we're in September now. It's back to normal. There's no more Frost Festival. So looking forward to the leaderboard next month.
Yep.
Or the leaderboard this month coming out next month. And as for us, I mean, you guys know we do the leaderboard every now and then. So we didn't try for August, and we're not trying for this month. But I will take a shot at it in October, assuming the arena does not go crazy. I reserve the right to withdraw very early if Blizzard like follows up this synergy pick stuff with like some other experimental thing.
Yeah,
But assuming synergy picks are like either just still here because they haven't taken it back yet, or they do get taken back as Blizzard said they would in the patch after this upcoming patch, then I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
It's a pretty good meta. I think both you and I have been doing really well in KFT. Like I know our YouTube editors are dying right now because we've been sending out so many 12-win runs.
Right, because at the end of the day, it is very board centric, right? And when I think having a board centric meta definitely sort of it favors players who have played a lot on the board before, right? It's not just about the individual powerful cards, of which there are a lot of. People focus on the bone mares and they focus on the Cobalt Scalebanes, but it is about the small, like the snowball, the incremental gains turn after turn, and then suddenly you have a huge advantage.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's talk about that deep fried meta. Jumping right into it, transition. We're calling this hold the line and then counter strike, and so it's a concept that we haven't broken it down like this, but I'm sure we basically covered before. And I want to focus in on this because in deep fried meta we deep fried the meta, but the meta's been deep fried like before day one. We all knew what was coming. It came, and then it was like, oh no, synergy picks. And then we've gotten to the point where Blizzard made the synergy picks a bit better, and we know the synergy picks are leaving soon, and we all know to not do anything with the synergy picks and just to try to survive them by picking the most normal cards possible. So in the actual KFT meta, what you do is you try to hold the board, right? You try to curve stone out on the board, and then you try to make sure your opponent has nothing to buff while you have stuff to buff. You play tempo, tempo, tempo. You don't try to go for card advantage anytime before like turn 8 or something. And you just play, and that's a pretty basic play style. And if you just do that, you're okay. But what I want to talk about is just how far you go to ensure that you hold the board. So holding the line to me means that when you have a board of some amount and your opponent is playing things, you also have a hand, and your hand can have initiative, which can then make sure your opponent really has nothing on the board. So if you have like 1 minion with initiative on the board and your opponent plays 2 minions, you can remove something on the board, and then you can use the spell to remove the other one, and then you still have the board. But now the minion that you used before is a bit weaker, and so you've actually lost tempo on the board, but you've held it, right? Like you prevented him from buffing it. So that's what holding the line generally means. And sometimes if you just want to do the most board clearing kind of play, it actually costs you not just card advantage, but also tempo. Like, you could get more tempo on the turn if, let's say, you just play a Bog Creeper. But if you want to make sure your opponent doesn't get on the board, maybe you have to play a Raptor and a Frostbolt. And that's not as much tempo as if you just slammed the Bog Creeper down and removed one of their minions. So at some point, you have to actually make these decisions. That's, do I play the highest tempo play, or do I try to hold the line and make sure your opponent can't buff anything? So that's a big decision point right now in the KFT meta, I think, and that determines a lot of games. So what do you think about that? Well, when would you advise to clear the board and at the cost of like 1 or 2 mana's worth of tempo? And when would you advise to just play a high tempo play or even like card advantage play?
Right. I think in those situations, so once again, defining the scenario that we're looking at here, and I faced it many times, right? It's like you quote have the board.
You face it
right?
like multiple times every game.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's like where you have the board, but unless you are curving out perfectly, you're going to get into that like awkward, like 1 or 2 turns in which you can't like play out perfectly, right? And you get to the point where you're just like, man, I have to, I'll say sacrifice a lot, or like I have to use up so much stuff in order to get the perfect clear. Yep. So in those situations, I sort of just ask 2 big questions here. Number 1 is, how bad is the punish? Like, or how punishing is the punish, right? And number 2, I'm like, what is my follow-up? Really, so it's sort of like, all right, if I clear the board completely, what is my follow-up, right? Like, and if I don't clear the board, if I play the Bog Creeper instead of clearing his board, sort of what is my follow-up there, right? And then these 2 questions sort of connect with each other. Like, if I play the Bog Creeper, what's my follow-up? And also, how can he punish me, right? Like, is the Bone Mare that
how can he punish me is just a fancy way of saying, what is my opponent's follow-up?
Sure, yeah.
So you're just looking at the next turn. And when you're looking at the next turn for your side, you know what's happening because you know what cards you have. So if, for example, let's say if I could curve out on a bot creeper, and then the next turn I need to top deck something, or else I'm going to not be able to curve out for whatever reason. Like, let's say the only cards in my hands are like an Arcane Intellect, the super situational card, and a 3-drop, right? Like, maybe I just won't be able to curve out next turn. There's a pretty high chance that I won't be able to curve out next turn. And then you have to think, well, if I don't curve out next turn, what's more important right now? Do I try to hold the line? Do I play the high tempo play? Or maybe I just play the card advantage play because I'm losing the board anyway. All right? So it depends on what you have in your hand. So, but assuming that you can curve out the next turn, that's what's going to push you towards trying to hold the line harder, right? If you can continue to hold the line, or if you can continue to like out-tempo the next turns. So I think at the very basic is if you're trying to hold the line this turn at the cost of tempo by clearing your opponent's board, make sure that 100% of the time your follow-up the next turn can also clear the board of your opponent if they play reasonable numbers of things. Because if you can't, then what's the point? Holding the line for one extra turn doesn't do anything unless you're setting up for something like literally the turn after that, like 2 turns after that. So then you're just delaying it for 1 turn, and that matters a lot. But if delaying it for 1 turn doesn't matter a lot, and you need to top deck it out to be able to continue holding the board, maybe just let your opponent have the board. Maybe do a high tempo play, like a bot creeper. Remove the thing that could punish the bot creeper if it were buffed, and then let your opponent play out. Because at some point, this isn't Curvestone anymore. Like, your opponent has 1,000,000 tricks to flip the board on you now, and you have 1,000,000 tricks to flip the board back on your opponent. So you can't just always clear your opponent's board. So while I recommend holding the line over tempoing out, at some point when you recognize that 1 or 2 turns down the line you can no longer hold the line, you may want to start shifting into tempo rather than holding the line earlier, even if your opponent does buff a minion, right? And like Merv said, when you're looking at whether your opponent buffs a minion, like look at the worst case scenario. Usually the worst case scenario is something like a Death Speaker before turn 7. Is that
Sure.
bad? If you leave something of your opponent with like 2 attack and it hits something and it lives, is that really all that bad if your opponent has to play a 3-mana 2/4 to achieve that? Maybe not. Usually not, actually. That's one of the reasons why Death Speaker is not the most broken card in the game. And after turn 7 and after, like, would a Bone Mare do something? Like, if your opponent has a 1/1 on the board that you're leaving and then you play the Bot Creeper, well, you know what a Bone Mare is going to do? Not all that much. Like, it's going to turn the 1/1 into a 5/5 and you have a 6/8 on the board. It's not going to do anything. It's just going to add a bunch more stats onto the board, which is bad, but it's not going to make you lose the game by any stretch of the imagination, or even the board that turn. So you're fine. And so those are the 2 levels, drilling down a little about what it means practically of how you're considering whether to fully remove your opponent's board by using resources or by playing a higher tempo play.
Yeah, and this is one of those, I think part of the reason we're talking about this is when you start playing the game, players tend to play very one-dimensionally, right? Like they see something, they identify something as good, and they do it. And most of the time, it is quite good, right? Trading on the board, clearing
getting
the
good
board.
trades.
Yes. So this advice that we're giving, and I think we talked a little bit about it last week as well, although not in depth. This is sort of the first separation from, like the average player, right? Or like the 4-win player from the 5-6-win players, right? Like going away from the absolutes, the people who always want to trade on the board because they know it is a good thing to do, which it usually is. So identifying when to hold the line, when to tempo out, this will improve your win rate dramatically because you are not only playing the right situation, but it helps you with the game sense, right? The game awareness to know like what is my next turn and sort of the future turn planning. Because if you are consistently trading on the board, you also have tunnel vision. You're not looking at the next few turns, that process
always look at the next few turns, especially when you're trading on the board. Because if you can't hold the line the next few turns, don't try to hold the line now at the cost of other things. Because the point of holding the line is my opponent now has cards stuck in his hand. It's a Death Speaker, It's a bone mare. It's like, I don't know, some other buff cards. Like, they can't play them. That's the advantage of holding the line repeatedly. Now, if all you're doing is, instead of saying you can't play those cards, you're saying you can't play those cards next turn, but you can play the turn after that. Well, it's not worth all that much anymore. So you have to recognize when those situations are happening, and in those cases, you let the line break. You just leave them with minions on the board to buff. You put out a lot of tempo to set yourself up for the counter-strike that's coming up next. And that's, so when you retake the board, and that's a very important concept, because when your opponent buffs something and tries to attack your minions, usually what they have left are very like low health minions with really high attack. And those are very easily cleared by almost any kind of board clear or a small removal. So if you have small removals or board clears in your hand, maybe don't burn the small removals to continuously hold the line. Maybe save the small removals, kind of like let the line break a little, and then retake it immediately the next turn or the turn after that if you're going to lose the board for a couple turns anyway. So as much as the KFT meta rewards having the board, when you as a player are looking at it, like, don't be single-minded towards making sure you always have the board, because you also have to kill your opponent. So just having the board for like 12 straight turns does not win you the game if your line breaks at that point and your opponent has 3 more cards than you and the tempo, you know? Like, because you've used up all of your good resources, all of your powerful cards to try to continuously hold the line and trade. You have to evaluate when is best to let the line break and then counter-strike to retake the board afterwards, and when to keep holding the line to block your opponents from playing their cards.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate. So I think the question is sort of, how do you identify situations in which you can counter-strike, right? Or where you should counter-strike. So I think you talked about when you should counter-strike, which is turns in which it is just not advantageous for you to like sort of keep holding on, right? In which you see either this turn is bad, the next turn is bad. If you
so it's not you counter-strike at that point. It's you set up the counter-strike by losing the board.
Right. You want to lose the board. So how do you lose the board? First of all, you don't just like play nothing or just hero power and pass, right? What you want to be prioritizing during these turns is now is the time to sort of make your opponent play into you, right? Play stuff in which they have like they have the trades that you want, like, and if they trade any other way, you're kind of okay with it as well. So if you can do that, or now is the time to play that Gnomish Inventor, right? Now is the time to like draw those cards while still putting something out on the board. Make it awkward for them by playing like, your stand against darkness, right? Like playing a lot of stuff. Maybe they can soak up a lot of damage, or they can use up an additional resource while you sort of delay one more turn.
The kind of rule of thumb to follow is to not use resources while making it awkward for your opponent.
Yeah, that would definitely be the best thing to do. Like, so Gnomish Inventor is sort of like a really good way to do that, right?
You don't use any resources that way.
Yep. And obviously, like, when are you able to counter-strike? It is when you have a good response, just not this turn, or you need a little bit of setup in order to get there, right? So when you have the Flame Strike, when you have the Primordial Drake, when you have the Volcano is a terrific one. That is a really, really good one because it is extremely tough for your opponent to play around. So when you have cards like those, but you can't play it right now, so what should you do, right? Like, well, you can keep on holding onto the board, but you are slowly losing the board, and you're not setting up for the best counter-strike, the best Flame Strike, Volcano that you possibly can. That's when you sort of let up.
Yep. And in KFT, one of the ways to counter-strike that wasn't as available before is your buffs are ways to counter-strike. Like, if you play a Stand Against Darkness, it's just a bunch of minions. Because when can you not hold the line, or when do you have to use resources to hold the line? So you don't have enough stuff to attack your opponent's board. But you still have all the mana that you're going to use to put stuff on the board on your turn, right? So if I only have one card with initiative and my opponent plays 3 minions, I'm not clearing that. And that's fine. So I'm no longer holding the line. I can only tempo out. So then I tempo out and I play 3 minions of my own. Well, now my opponent is faced with, he only has 2 minions left because I've eaten one of his minions with my minion, and I have 4 minions left. So he's not going to clear me either. So I have not held the line, but I've set myself up so that I can counter strike the next turn, even if he gets value by buffing, because I am almost guaranteed that I will also be able to buff, right? Because if you buff something, you don't get an extra attack. That's the penalty of, like, that's the weakness of buffing rather than a removal. So if I have something like, let's say a 5/5, and my opponent plays like 3/3/3/3/3/3, I'm not removing him off the board. Buffing the 5/5 doesn't really do anything. So I could just take a 5/5, hit a 3/3, play a bunch of other stuff. Next turn, let him do whatever, and then that turn, and then the turn after my opponent does whatever and is on the board and buffs his stuff, I counter buff my own stuff that's still surviving. And then I get the same value back as my opponent did. Because, you know, assuming I have buffs. On the other hand, if you just throw your buff immediately onto the 5/5, because you're like, oh, I have a card with initiative, I might as well buff it, I get some value out of it this turn, and I get to use my buff card, well, you've actually lost the initiative. Because you didn't use the buff to do anything. You just used it for stats, as if they were like dead stats on the board that can't do anything the next turn. So one of the ways to counter-strike is to immediately counter-strike the turn after that by setting up a board and then buffing.
Yep. So, look, what we're talking about here, I think it's just a very nuanced version of turn planning and risk assessment, right? Mm-hmm. But I think this talk is really important now because as I have sort of experienced while playing, you know, obviously every meta is different, right? And you have to adjust. But I had to adjust quite a lot for you know, for this expansion, just because there are so many buffs and there are so many sort of the answers are so different because they're so board centric, right? Previous answers were from the hand, you know, like the Dragonfires and Meteors, and while they're still there, there's a difference now in the offering rate. So now the calculus, right? The calculation of whether to remove them from the board or, you know, like how I should counter-strike, it's been changed a lot. So now is a good time, you know, if you think you have the skill, definitely practice it more, right? Like see if you really know it because it's changed so much. And if you don't have the skill, like you have to develop it because it's so important, not only for this meta, but for metas ahead. Like it's always been important. I just think it's even more important now because of the board-centric nature of this expansion.
Yep, that sounds about right. And that's why we're talking about holding the line and counter-striking right now. It's hard to, like, KFT is such a normal meta, so to speak. Like it's, they put a lot of cards out and they all kind of work with everything else. It's actually a very good arena expansion in the sense of bringing everything down, like bring everything down back onto the board in a more normal feeling pace, while at the same time creating more complex situations for you to evaluate. But the one decision-making point that I see happening repeatedly over and over again every single game, where it used to happen like maybe once every 2 or 3 games, it's now happening multiple times a game, is this hold the line concept. Like, when do I keep removing and when do I kind of, the way I described it to Merps before the podcast is, you know, sometimes when you're fighting, you just take a hit. Like your opponent hits and you could spend all of your resources and block the entire hit and put yourself in a worse position relative to your opponent, or you can let the hit land so that your opponent is a little out of position and so you can launch a counter attack and then, you know, really put yourself in a better position. And that's one of the things that you'll have to do repeatedly in the KFT meta.
Is this something that you're very, very familiar with?
Yeah, you can tell, but you can tell by my language and the way I describe it that I've clearly been in many of these situations in real life.
Right, or you take a hit from the chicken quesadilla, so you can so you can eat more chicken quesadillas in the future. Is that? I mean, is that appropriate?
And I can eat all other kinds of quesadillas too. Now that I've opened the floodgates.
Interesting. Fascinating.
All right.
Thank you for that.
So that's Deep Fried Meta for today. Let's go on to a question from the GOAT.
All right. Question from the GOAT comes from our subreddit. And I need to do a little bit of preface here. But question from the GOAT basically comes from Dreadnought24. Dreadnought24 posted on our Grinning Goat subreddit and basically said, you know, back when I made the sample list of questions for a mental checklist that you should be going through each turn, essentially Dreadnought was having problems implementing it. He was basically saying that he sees two options. First, he can try a comprehensive checklist, but he doesn't have enough time, or he can just sort of focus on a few small things, but he feels like he misses key questions. So his question is basically, how do I get faster at thinking and decision-making and knowing what to focus on? The pros know how to do this, and I see coaching sessions where the pros will point out a student forgot to consider something, but only on certain turns. So Dreadnought, what I would say is, first of all, I'm going to give you the answer that you probably don't like hearing, which is it gets better, right? Like there's no checklist for the checklist, essentially. There's no way to easily say, okay, here is how you implement it. Like what you want to do at the beginning is honestly go through all the questions. Go through all the questions, memorize the questions, even just outside of the game, right? Because when you're trying to implement it inside of the game, what happens is you're trying to juggle many things at once. It's like in sports as well, right? You simulate the game and then you implement it in the game, and by playing the game many times, you get better as well, right? But first, there is also the simulation portion. Now, you don't have to do this. It's not absolutely necessary. Some people will be like, Merps, you're insane. You're basically saying do this prep outside of a game for wizard poker. I'm saying, yeah. I mean, if you really want to get better, sure. I would recommend like just reading over a few times, like remembering this outside of the game and then implementing it inside of the game, right? And what you will notice is that you are just going to get better and better at it, faster and faster. The questions that you ask yourself in the mental checklist will bleed together. And at this point, when I do my mental checklist, I basically answer all of those questions probably in about 10 seconds. And the rest of the turn is just weighing the 55-45 decisions. It's going through my reads and I'm like, man, like I think there's like a 60% chance he has the AoE, but maybe it's like 80% chance he has the AoE, and that changes my decision drastically. It's fine tuning the turn afterwards. And you will just, as you get more and more practice, all those questions will bleed into each other. So you never have to worry about like, man, do the pros just like ask the questions really fast? It's like how fast Hafu types, like is that just like how they do it? And it's because I've asked those questions many times, and at the end they just bleed into each other. Mm-hmm. But it's from asking those questions one at a time, multiple times, that I am able to do that.
And eventually you get to the point where you recognize when you don't have to ask the question because you have actually just asked and answered the question, and it was a scenario that you've seen a million times. You're just like, this question, nope, you don't need that. This question, no, you don't need that. This question, no, you don't need that. And then you just get rid of so many questions like that in each scenario. But you can't really there's no way to learn that so much as you pattern recognition enough in enough scenarios that you're like, well, I asked this question, it was no, and it was always no. And then you're like, well, it's probably no because of this underlying factor. And so whenever I see this, I just don't have to ask the question, and you don't have to think about it. And that saves a lot of mental energy. So yeah, it's not easy to get faster, but you just got to build it. You can check yourself every time, right? Whenever something goes wrong, be like, which question did I not ask? And then be like, okay, I have to ask that one. And eventually, you'll actually naturally forget enough of the steps that only the important ones are left, because you keep hitting up upon them whenever you're like, oh crap, he took over the board again. Why did that happen? Oh, I missed this step.
Also, when you get faster and faster, as you get more practice, you'll notice that at the beginning of every turn, you're only asking the important questions. Like you will, I wouldn't say subconsciously, but you will have practiced so much that out of all of the questions I've listed, you will naturally identify that only 3 or 4 of them are actually really important. And then so you just spend your time on those. And that once again comes from practice. That comes from repetitions. But at the beginning, I would say, because I think I think this was episode 94 of the Lightforge. I would recommend just listen to that, write out your checklist, my checklist, however you want to change it around, whatever you feel comfortable with. study it. Like I would actually recommend studying it outside of the game and then implement it in the game, and then keep on implementing in the game over and over and over and over and over again. And at the beginning, it will feel frustrating. You will rope. It won't feel great, and you won't know the answer to some of the questions, which is fine. But as you keep on doing it, you're training yourself to think the right way, even though you might not get the right results. But if you build the foundation, if you build the machine correctly, like the results will follow, right? So keep on working at it, keep on, building that checklist, because without it, you won't improve. You need it. So there will be a lot of growing pains, but good luck, believe in you, and to all of you guys, out there as well.
All right. That's a question from the GOAT, brought to you by our patrons, patreon.com/grinninggoat. Thank you guys so much for your support. It's how we keep the light on here at the Lightforge. Moving on, we are going to play Warlock after this one. As you know, we play an arena run after, like a co-op arena run after each of these Lightforges, and we don't pick the class. But today we get a nice class. We get a really interesting class, and it is Warlock. Which I think outside of Druid, Warlock has gone through the most transformation in the arena. And I think we purposefully talked less about the Warlock than the other classes, because I think we have less of a good grasp on what exactly is happening with the Warlock. But it's been like a month and a half now, and I think we're at the point, or at least I'm at the point now, where I'm comfortable talking about what a Warlock is doing and what the Warlock's place is here in the arena. So we have it ranked mid-tier, somewhere between positions like 5 and 6 on the class tier list.
Right. So I think with the Warlock, it's certainly interesting, right? From the beginning of this, at the very beginning of this year, in January, February, it was the powerhouse class because this was pre 7.1. This was pre, the Abyssal Enforcer nerf, and it was just dominating everyone with its powerful cards. And after the nerf, Warlock saw some rough times, right? Because the beginning of this year, Warlock was defined by incredibly powerful cards, just ridiculous, and they had everything: single target removal, AoE, powerful minions, sticky minions, the whole works, tempo plays. And in the pre KFT, they just kind of stunk because they lost all of their powerful, not all of their powerful cards, but they lost a lot of powerful cards, and they lost a lot of their tempo plays and early game plays. So then it just became this slow kind of control class.
Remember what happened? Like Abyssal Enforcer was gone, Power Overwhelming got moved to Hall of Fame. Like the Warlocks lost a lot.
Yeah, Imp Gang Boss.
A lot of things got moved when they became standard as well. Right,
and also a lot of the neutral sort of wild cards were very, very good for Warlock, right? Because they were extreme tempo cards in the early game. And if Warlock can just tempo out heavily in the early game, they have so much value in the late game.
Like Warlock's not like Hunter. It doesn't have its own cards, its own class cards to play on the 1 and 2 slots. Like not enough of them. Actually, it has no 2-drops almost. It's like very, very few 2-drops. So it needed those neutral cards, and it doesn't have them.
No. So where are we at now with the Warlock, right? We obviously think it is pretty good. It's not like top tier, but what has changed from last expansion, which Warlock was really bad, to now where Warlock is pretty good? I think first we have to look at the power cards, right? Like the cards that Warlocks were given that just have extreme value by themselves. Number 1, which is Defile, and number 2, which is what was it? The Dreadnought thing.
The demon thing.
The demon. The 5 mana, 4/5 minion that deals 1 damage to all enemies.
We know KFT, Despicable Dreadlord.
Despicable Dreadlord. Despicable Dreadlord.
And just to give you an idea, once again, these are both cards rated above Doom, which was the highest rated card before this new expansion. They are both rated above Blood Reaver Gul'dan. They are really, really, really insane cards for the Warlock. These are like, they're rated above Shadow Flame. They're just the best cards. And there's 2 of them, and one's rare. They're both rare, which really all that means is that they get offered the same as common class cards. And they have a class bonus. Like, they're everywhere.
Yeah. So, look, these cards are really good because of the value that they can give, right? Defile deals a lot of damage on average, a lot more than what you should get for 2 mana, as long as you set it up correctly. Despicable Dreadlord also is just insane. Even if it just pinged once, you're already getting value with it. But also, if you look at the nature of these cards, what has elevated Warlock is that these 2 cards also give you sort of initiative, right? And comeback potential. Suddenly, Warlock is a class that can kind of play off the board a little bit, right? These cards, in addition to Shadow Flame, in addition to Fellfire Potion, Hellfire, Blast Crystal that they've always have, they are one of the few classes that can play off the board and still win, which is a valuable skill to have. And it's a trait that not a lot of classes have anymore.
And what they do so well is they punish you for having the board, and what you want to do is have the board because it's the KFT meta. So that's where the Defile gets so much of its value. Like when you definitely don't have enough stuff to clear their board, and all of a sudden their whole board is cleared, and you're dealing like Defile's a stupid card. It's 2 mana. It should like deal like, I don't know, something like 1.5 damage to all minions. I think on average it deals like 3.5 from like what I've seen when I've seen it used. Like it's a pretty ridiculous card. Yeah, sure, sometimes you're locked out of using it because it would destroy your whole board, but for the most part you use it as a Counter-Strike card, right? Like, or you use it like even if your opponent doesn't set it up for you, you're like, all right, well, I'll be off the board the next turn, and you know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to have enough small minions left that you can't clear that I'm going to be able to set whatever Defile that I want to set up, and then I'll be back on the board, because Defile's only 2 mana. So Warlocks can do that, like Merp said, but I also like what Warlock can do now, which is if you can get like vaguely the correct number of curve cards, which is really hard, but you're going to try to draft for it anyway, right? Like in Warlock, small cards are worth a lot. So if you can get enough of the 1-drops and the 2-drops, you can really just snowball that. Not in terms of like necessarily on the board snowball, but your whole entire game plan as the Warlock was always put enough minions on the board, kill your opponent's minions, use the hero power, gain a large card advantage, and then eventually win because you just have so many more cards and more options than your opponents do. And that was always the Warlock's advantage. And what does that sound like? That sounds like pretty much every class in KFT. Now that you have this class convergence based on neutral cards in KFT, everyone is playing the way Warlocks used to like want to play. And so this is going right up the Warlock's alley. All the neutral cards are supporting the same playstyle. So as a Warlock, what you want to do is very clear, very simple. And on top of that, you have this additional like out cards, right? Of being able to play off the board to set up your counter strikes if your line doesn't hold. It's in a very good spot in that sense. The reason why Warlock is not rated higher, though, higher than like 4, 5, 6, is because it is still a very inconsistent class to draft. Like I said, like you don't have your own curve cards. You have to rely on getting curve cards, and you do have a bunch of removals, but it's not that many. Like it's like Shaman style, right? Like you have enough removals in the class, but who knows if you'll get it, and who knows if you'll get the right ones. And if you do get enough removals to play off the board, do you then have enough minions also, like that are actual solid minions that you can retake the board with? It's all a little draft dependent and a little draw dependent for Warlock. So it's a little shakier than let's say like other control classes like Mage back in the day. Although it's not anywhere near as bad as Priest, which is kind of all in on like, can I get a foothold on the board? If not, I'm still screwed.
Yeah, this is I like making the Mage versus Warlock comparison because I kind of some people have basically said that Warlocks have taken over Mage's previous spot, right, as the off the board sort of control class. And while they're not exactly the same, because Mage has sort of like additional flexibility with their hero power, right? Instead of just more value and more cards. It is sort of like, I do like the comparison just because you can go into a draft, and previously with Mage, you were getting value going into the draft. And now I feel kind of similar with the Warlock. Like, you're going to get the value, right? With other classes, I don't know if I'm getting value. Like, I don't know if my deck is able to outvalue, 80 or 90% of other decks. But you do sort of have that that comfort, that safety when you draft Warlocks now, and that's good. Like, it's part of what makes them very good when you know beforehand, like how or like typically how you should draft a deck on the sort of aggro versus control spectrum. It's not only comforting, it directs your draft very early on, which really helps you out.
Yeah. So now you have 4 classes that can kind of play off the board pretty well, even though one of them sucks and is Shaman. The Volcano really does a lot for Shaman. Warlocks have a whole bunch of new things to do for removal, so Warlock is there. Mage was always there, so Mage is still there. And now Druid is also added on top of the list with all the taunts that allow you to kind of play off the board and just stall a whole bunch. So it's getting to be a converging meta, like we said. Like, all the classes are getting more similar, but at the same time, within like your actual playstyle, you can be like the playstyle divergence is still happening. So I think there's a little more flexibility in what type of deck you want to build, even if there's less like differences between classes.
Yep. All
right. So that's Warlock, and we'll get to that right after this podcast. And we'll wrap up the podcast today with Card Good Bad. Card Good Bad. We did Bloatbat last week. Let's do a neutral card this week. Tomb Lurker, 91. This is also a synergy card. So until they actually take synergies away, which we don't know when it is. So if you guys haven't heard the news, tomorrow, which is Monday, which could be today or could be yesterday, depending on when you're listening to this podcast, that is when Blizzard is actually going to put the patch out. That will change Fiery War Axe, that will change Hex, that will nerf some of the Druid cards, like Innervate. That is coming out tomorrow. And then a patch after that is when synergy cards are going to get removed. So I don't know if it's going to happen next week or if it's going to be another week after that, but it's coming. But until then, Tomb Lurker, this guy, is still a synergy card, and you will see it a lot. What is Tomb Lurker? Tomb Lurker is a 5-mana 5/3, and it has the text that says, add a random death rattle card to your hand that died this game. So either from you or from your opponent. And we give it a 91. And just for comparison's sake, I want to find a similar card, which I am not finding right now. Polluted Hoarder is a very similar card. And there we go. Polluted Hoarder is the 4-mana 4/2 death rattle draw card, and it is a 108. So there's a huge difference from 108 to 91. That is a pretty big... Remember, we have an absolute 0 in our tier list ratings. So from 108 to 91 is like pretty much literally a 20% less value. And all you've done is move it from 4-mana 4/2 to a 5-mana 5/3. And instead of drawing a card, you're adding a random death rattle card that's died this game, but the quality of it is about the same as one from your deck because it had to have died this game. So it had to have come from someone's deck. So why is it so much worse than Polluted Hoarder?
Right. So let's go through a few reasons. Number one, first of all, like with the Polluted Hoarder, when it dies, you're guaranteed to draw a card. Right, you're guaranteed to draw a card. With this Tomb Lurker, a death rattle minion had to have died, right? And you don't have great ways to control not only if something gets played, what gets played, and then if multiple death rattle minions get played, it's like, well, I have no idea what I'm gonna get, right? It could be something that's very useless, and the important thing is it's always a death rattle minion, which means it gets onto the board, but it will very rarely have an impact on the board immediately, or an immediate impact, period. While Polluted Hoarder, when it draws a card, a certain percentage of your deck has initiative, right? not only has initiative, it'll help you immediately as well. And you think that with the Tomb Lurker, because this is a battle cry, so you get the card immediately, you can play it. It's still rated much lower because of all those factors that I have stated, right? And like with the Polluted Hoarder, you're also drawing a card that has been filtered in the way that you like. Like with Tomb Lurker, it is filtered in that you're still just drawing a card that has been played, and both people are drafting as well. But with the Polluted Hoarder, you're drawing a card from the way that you filtered it, from the deck that you like. So I think all of these factors put together, it just makes a lot of sense that this card, even though both of them supposedly draws you a card, and this is just +1/+1 for 1 more mana, it's significantly worse than a Polluted Hoarder.
Yeah, and I think one thing that the mail of that is true, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the card that you put back into your hand is not a random Death Rattle card. It's not a random Death Rattle card from both decks. It's a Death Rattle card that has already died, so it's going to be small.
Yeah.
The chances that it is a big card is a lot smaller when it had to have died than the chances of it being a big card if you draw from your deck. So the size of this card that you're drawing, and at this point, when you're not playing this on turn 5, just like you don't play Polluted Hoarder on turn 4 usually, what you really want is a sizable card that does something, right? So not only is this a Death Rattle card, which doesn't really do anything the turn it's played, it has to die first before anything happens, before like it gets like all of its value. On top of that, the chances skew towards smaller cards. So if you play it on turn 10 and 1 big Death Rattle's died and 2 small Death Rattles, well, you have a 2/3 chance of getting a small Death Rattle. That's not good, because on turn 10, what do you want? You want a big Death Rattle. You want just a big card. Especially if you're just going to get a minion with no initiative. You definitely want a bigger card rather than a random small card. So it's problematic in that way. Like there's a lot of things going on with this card that make it actually in practice a lot worse than it may seem upon first glance. And there are times in which you will not draw anything from it because just luck, right? Like there's bad luck that happens. No one played a Death Rattle card and you haven't drawn yours yet.
I played this card multiple times, drawing me nothing, and in that case, it sucks, right? It's really, really bad. So it happens, and those times significantly hurt its tier score as well, because you have to account for those.
So yeah, it's a pretty drastic 20% loss. Is like what's around a 91? Like decently like not very great cards around 91, right? That's like Abomination is a 90.
Tanera's Hog Chopper.
Yeah, right. Like Streetwise Investigator, like Servant of Kalamos, like they're playable cards, but you're not really terribly happy when you get them. And whereas a 110 is actually like a good card, that's probably like an average card in your deck. So yeah, so that's it for Tomb Lurker, and I hope going over these cards like kind of helps you like internalize how to use these cards too. And when you're drafting them, you can think, oh, do I want this type of card in this deck or not, right? Like Tomb Lurker could be really good in a deck if you just want extra value. It still does draw you a card, and it's a 5/3 to start with, so that's a pretty big sized card. But know its downsides. All right, so I think that's it for today. Until next week, this is Adwicta.
This is Merps. Good luck in the arena, guys.
All right.